reparations scheme for recommendations to the legislature, but our staff here at the Attorney General's office hold no opinions on recommendations. And so report part 2, the recommendation section, will likely include what reparations would be for, a state versus federal program, how reparations would be calculated, and how it would be administered. So part 1, as you can imagine, contains a lot of information, and this really has been the focus of our work so far. There are numerous advantages to a report in 2 parts. It will allow us to be as comprehensive as possible. As we heard earlier from our experts, and also by comments from the task force members, reparative justice is a process, and acknowledgement of the wrong committed is a critical element of the process. And so it is vital that we comprehensively and with particularity describe the wrongs committed by the American government at the state and federal level against Black Americans. So another advantage of the report in 2 parts is that we will be able to include all the information and witness testimony received during the public hearings into the reports. A 2-part report will allow for maximum public participation in this process. If we were directed to issue 1 report published by June 1, 2022, we would not be able to fully utilize the allocated funds given to us by the legislature. The reports could potentially be under-researched. It would be more challenging to plan public hearings and include maximum public participation in the process into the published report. Next slide. Okay, so our staff here has made a proposal of a report in 2 parts. Part 1 to describe the systemic discrimination and be published by June 1, 2022. And part 2 to discuss the recommendations and be published by July 1, 2023. And so here I ask that a member of the task force make a motion to accept the DOJ staff's proposal that the report be in 2 parts.
Madam Chair, I have a question or comment. Hello?
Go ahead, Dr. Brown.
I find it interesting in terms of the antithesis stating the problem. There was no mention of the out-migration of 1858 and the status of affairs in San Francisco alone that caused 800 to 1,000 Black folks to get aboard that ship, the Commodore, and go up to British Columbia and settle on Victoria Island at the invitation of General Douglas. Also, it should be underscored of what happened to R.C. Lee. That was a civil rights case that was prevalent here from 1857 to 1858, April the 13th. In addition to that, nothing's been mentioned about the contribution of the Immigration Department in terms of setting quotas, people to come to America from Asia and other countries over against Africa. Not mentioned anywhere. And that is a form of discrimination and setting Black folks up for internal struggle vis-a-vis the Ethiopians, the Eritreans, Ghanaians, and Nigerians. We must state the case about what immigration has done, and we must not leave out the problem of 1858.
Thank you for that. I guess someone could lead with the motion, but I also, had a question. It's more so a comment, and this is based off of a preliminary discussion that I had with the DOJ before we started. But my concern is, I'm okay with a two-part report. I guess my only reservations is for the two parts. I'm not sure if the two parts should be extended until the sunset deadline of 2023. And it kind of goes back to something Dr. Darity said earlier. This isn't really a truth and reconciliation process. Like, we understand that we have to do our due diligence in terms of gathering the research and the expert testimony and the public testimony to make sure that whatever report or reports, plural, that we publish are as comprehensive as possible. But the intent of this bill is a remedy bill more so than a study bill, right? And when you go, Black people being homeless, you see Black people suffering. And personally, I have reservations with extending the report until 2023. I think that if there's a way to expedite the process, that's something that I would be in favor of. But I understand that's a conversation that we might have to have at a later time. Can you please restate what's on the floor so that someone can make a motion?
Absolutely. So we are asking the task force to consider our proposal of issuing a report in two parts. One, to describe systemic discrimination and be published by the deadline of June 1, 2022. And part two, to discuss recommendations and to be published before the sunset date.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead. You can just talk. You don't have to call my name at this point. Go ahead, Dr. Brown.
Leave in order. You gotta recognize the chair.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Right, always. Thank you, ma'am. My concern is, do we have to spend a whole lot of time collecting data? This is the fierceness of the urgency of the now. I hope that the task force would say, we don't need no more deep studies. We just need the basic facts. We should spend the majority of our time dealing with the solution, not defining the problem. We've had all of these reports going back to Du Bois in 1903, 118 years ago. Problems of the 20th century would be the color line. Garner Murdahl wrote The American Dilemma 77 years ago. Then, in the wake of what happened to Rodney King, you had Hacker's book, Two Nations, Divided, Hostile, Unequal. We had the Kerner Commission report. And in addition to that, in addition to all of that, you still have people saying, we don't want to go back to slavery. That's what McConnell said the other day. They don't want to even hear about the problem. And I think we do ourselves a disservice to spend a whole year working to define a problem that we already know exists.
Madam Chair, I'll just, if I could jump in here very quickly. I agree with what has been said. Also, we are very blessed to have Chair Moore and Vice Chair Dr. Brown as the helm of how we're going to move with urgency. So I would go ahead and put the motion on the floor to move staff recommendation to split the report into two parts, just with if we need to come back and monitor that, I think we should. If we are, moving, obviously you're going to be pushing staff to move with urgency. So I think I'm comfortable with that, with what's put forward, and also with the chair and vice chair that we've chosen.
Second. Is there a second?
Yeah, I will second the motion to move the recommendation forward for two reasons. I do think the staff at the DOJ understands their capacity and their bandwidth intimately, and I value that recommendation and that insight. Secondly, I believe that any of our recommendations, because they are the first of their kind, are going to be under not only tremendous public scrutiny, but eventually rigorous legal and judicial scrutiny. So it's going to be critical that we dot all of our I's, cross all of our T's, and do a comprehensive study. We know it's out there, we know it exists, but we need to get it down, documented on paper. And I respectfully disagree with Madam Chair that this is not a truth and reconciliation process. When Dr. Groves talks about healing, part of that process is uncovering the truth. When you've been gaslighted for 400 years, truth is critical, right? And so a meticulous foundation that uncovers the truth is what is needed in this process. And so I agree with the recommendation to have a substantial process of uncovering and revealing the truth, and bifurcating it into a 2-year process. So I second.
I would like to chime in a bit, Madam Chair. Your points are well taken, as with Dr. Brown. And just in the spirit of thinking out loud, and far be it from me to tell leaders of the Black community what they should and shouldn't do. So I want to be very respectful of that. But again, some things with the Japanese American reparations experience are applicable, some are not. But one thing we did learn was the power of persuasion in doing a meticulous report. And while you all know what the history is, most Americans overwhelmingly do not. They have no idea of the horror that went on. And while there have been many books and treatises and reports, and you're right, Dr. Brown, Kerner Commission report, I mean, it's so relevant today, and yet it was written so many years ago. At the same time, it's a new day. It's a point of inflection. Country is in a racial reckoning, and now is the time to educate the public. And when that happened with Japanese American redress, I have to say, even our own community did not know how bad things were because people did not talk about it. And the stories they told in a very human way, the emotional impact of that was enormous on the public. So I agree with you. The issue is about remedies, Madam Chair, in the end, but to get there is persuasion. And ultimately, California is one level, but on the national level, we're talking about ultimately passing HR 40 and developing the consensus behind that. And so we need to get to that mass in the middle. At least that was the experience of Japanese Americans. So I think there's a value in bifurcating this into two parts and really doing a comprehensive thing with the idea that this will be a model for the nation. And so I want to second what Lisa Holder just said. I think that was a point that resonated with me.
At this point, and so as not to get too far from the motion that's currently on the floor and has been seconded, we will move to a vote, understanding that the members may want to engage in other discussion. The motion on the floor is to accept the recommendation of DOJ to have the report issued in 2 parts as previously described by my colleague. It's been brought by Councilmember Montgomery Steppe and seconded by Lisa Holder. We're going to vote again in roll call order by last name alphabetically. Senator Bradford. We'll come back to Senator Bradford. Dr. Brown.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Dr. Brown, I didn't hear you say yay or nay.
I believe Dr. Brown said aye.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Dr. Grills.
Dr. Grills, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I have a procedural question here because once a vote is on the floor, there's call for discussion. And I have yet to be able to voice my opinion about what's been shared about what we're voting about. So I'm not sure how to proceed.
Point of order. Because the motion has been made, I feel like it should have been voted upon, but we will hold the motion pending further discussion from the task force, if that is what the chair thinks is appropriate.
Yes, that was what I was going to suggest before Dr. Grill spoke up. So thank you. I think there needs to be action on this matter before we take a vote. So go ahead, Dr. Grills.
Okay, thank you. So I do appreciate the comments that have been made that we have, in fact, investigated this issue to death. At the same time, I also think that it is important, some of the things that other members of the task force have been sharing about, persuasion and about being very careful to cross our T's and dot our I's. I think that we need, I agree with the 2-part. I also think that we could figure out a way to expedite the process just a little bit, altering that timeline. But I think we do need to do our due diligence in making sure that community voice is included in our process. And so if we rush that, we run the risk of not being inclusive and not having community buy-in. We're dealing with a set of recommendations that is not going to please everyone. And we want to be able to say that we have at least taken the time to hear everyone and to uncover what we yet still do not know, particularly about California. Last week, I just at the last minute found out about a webinar being held by African Americans in Contra Costa County, where they were quote unquote exploring reparations. I was so glad I went to that because I heard things I had never heard that would have not necessarily crossed my radar, that I think would need to be factored into our deliberations. So we want to make sure we take the time to do that work while balancing out the urgency of the moment.
Should I just jump in or do I raise my hand? How are we doing this?
Please just jump in. Thank you. Let's have an organic discussion.
Okay, and hopefully this moves us to where we just go ahead and vote, because what I'm hearing is what we in the legislature call who is harmed, what is going on, how you generate excitement for your bill or generate excitement for your issue is you got to show harm. And we've known for decades and decades, there have been books written by Black scholars, white scholars about slavery. And it wasn't until the emotional movie of Roots in the 70s that all of a sudden we Black folk wanted to go back to Africa. We wanted to explore our history. We wanted to know what was going on. But most important, we really never really understood the horrors of slavery until it visually slapped us in the face and took hold of us. Sometimes you can't get that in a report. So it is very, 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 very important to have accuracy, cross our T's and dot our I's. But we do have to convince the community, even Black people, that the harm that was perpetrated on us was so detrimental, so significant, that whatever we say in part two, as far as making us whole, I'll use the term making us whole, that people just nod their head and go, yes. Because for me, part one is generating that enthusiasm, generating that cause. Look, a lot of people didn't believe police shoot black people in the back until when? They saw Rodney King, and then they started to see this visual of people getting shot, black men, unarmed black men getting shot, black women getting killed. Then it became real. Unfortunately, it became real in the 2020s, but you know, that's what happens. So no disrespect to DOJ, but they are very technical folk, and they'll put it down like lawyers. No disrespect to the lawyers here, but they'll put it down that way. But we got to give those pages life in a way that isn't usually in a report. And I think that's our responsibility to help DOJ and the AG's office write this in a way that it inspires people to our mission, our cause, but ultimately, hopefully, why we chose what we chose. The two-part system makes sense to me, as long as we're on the first part. Because if you nail the first part, part two is going to be really, really easy. But you got to nail that first part. You got to generate publicity. You got to do all of that, which may be another conversation away from here about how we, as someone said, you get buy-in, or as Dr. Grills just said, I went to a meeting, heard some things that I might incorporate. Well, guess what? That group she went to, they now may be engaged or even have buy-in because she used just one piece of what they wanted. People want to be heard on this, and people want to be heard. They at least believe that they've been heard and that what was said was important to them. That's why I asked about us being able to hear from other people outside of this. And I still have some doubts about how we can have a full conversation with everyone in the state and beyond. But I will work with you to work on that. So I'm an I. So let's hopefully we can move forward.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have a comment on this point of discussion? Okay. I also just wanted to just correct and clarify. It's not that I'm saying that this isn't about truth and reconciliation, right? All I'm saying is that this project is much more than truth and reconciliation. Truth and reconciliation is a part of this process, but it shouldn't necessarily be central to this process. And back to Dr. Darity's point with the example of, let's say, South Africa, right? They came up with their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid, but 20, 30 odd years since apartheid, right? The Black majority still has considerably less wealth and power than the white minority. And so, like I said, more than just truth and reconciliation, even though that is a very important part of this project. Okay, thank you. At this point in time, let's just take a vote. For those in favor, well, let's just go in order of my screen. The vote, actually, let me take it to the DOJ. The DOJ can say the question and then take the vote.
Okay, so again, the motion on the floor that's been presented by Councilmember Montgomery Stepp and seconded by Lisa Holder is to accept the recommendation of the DOJ to do the report in two parts as has been presented to the task force thus far. We previously began the roll call, so we will start again. Apologies and thank you for your patience with Senator Bradford. Okay, we will come back to Senator Bradford. Dr. Brown?
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown is an aye. Moving along, Dr. Grills.
Aye.
Dr. Grills is an aye. Moving along, Lisa Holder.
Aye.
Thank you, Lisa Holder. That's an aye. Assemblymember Joan Sawyer.
Aye.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Dr. Javon Scott Lewis.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Monica Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Thank you, Councilmember. Chair Moore.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair. Don Tamaki. One more time, sir. I didn't catch you.
Aye, yes.
Thank you very much. By a vote of 8 members present with yeas, that motion carries. Thank you all for your patience and your discussion. See you.
Thanks, Sarah. So next in the presentation is a plan that our task force developed with the objective of maximizing our limited resources and using the 10 public meetings in the most efficient way possible, with a particular objective of what member Joan Sawyer had just, and others on the task force had highlighted, which is to put on and tell a compelling story to the California and the American public in support of reparations. And so, given the interconnected nature and the enormous volume of the issues, our team strongly recommends that the task force sits in full for all 10 meetings, this being one of 10. Next slide. So full public meeting gives the task force an opportunity to really turn the tide in the way that this country discusses race, racial injustice, and reparations for Black Americans. We anticipate collaborating with the newly elected chair and vice chair to book witnesses, set meeting dates, but we wanted to give you sort of our initial concepts for how these meetings may be scheduled in terms of our limited time. And we wanted to add that this first meeting is really an anomaly because we had to adhere to Bagley-Keene and the fact that our staff had to plan this first meeting without input from the task force members because the task force had not yet been convened. This meeting is really an anomaly, and this will not be the case moving forward. Next slide. So as you will see, we propose that these public hearings be built around the sections of the report and organized around themes specific to certain sections that fit well together. These public hearings are a way to change, again, the public discussion and conversation here in the United States on reparations, and to reframe that discussion that even though slavery happened in the past, its effects are felt by Black Americans today. And we have this unique platform and opportunity to give regular Americans an opportunity to understand the experience of the lived experience of being Black. And so therefore we propose that at every meeting, not only there be expert testimony to summarize the systemic discrimination in each area, but that there is also testimony from everyday Black Americans. So for example, the August meeting will be a public hearing on the roots of systemic racism, which would include the institution of slavery, but also political participation, in other words, disenfranchisement of Black Americans, and racial terror. So I'm going to give you a more sort of in-depth look at our proposed meeting structure for the August meeting towards the end of my presentation. So October will be government segregation in housing and education. That hearing will also include a component of environmental justice. December will include will be a hearing on the discrimination in arts and culture, the creation of racist stereotypes, which all led to the dehumanization of Black Americans, and the effects, including on health and family. So we'll likely spend the winter revising and incorporating comments from the task force on part 1 of the report. And the next meeting will be in mid-February and mid-March to make sure that we are able to incorporate all of the information from the public meetings, the emotional testimony that relate to part 1 into part 1 of the report. So we've left meeting 7 unplanned and we'll be taking direction from the task force. Meeting 8 would discuss the apology and precedents of reparations, both domestic and international. Meeting 9 would consider proposals for reparations. Meeting 10 would be a presentation and approval of the potential report part 2. So here, again, the DOJ staff has made a proposal, and I ask that a member of the task force make a motion to adopt this public hearing outline as developed by the team.
Madam Chair, I make the motion that we adopt the proposed schedule.
Okay, before a second, let's do discussion on the matter. Is there any discussion on the matter before we ask for a second?
Yes, I have a question about how we plan as a task force to incorporate a timeline for thinking through resolutions along the 10 meetings, because it does seem as if the kind of comprehensive issue of the kind of harm or injury has been, I think, appropriately broken up into these various sections, but it does seem as if we won't really have a chance until maybe the very end to kind of think of them comprehensively. And that to me is a worry, because I believe that we won't really be able to have adequate time to come up with anything really robust, because we will be basically taking most of our meetings doing, part of the fact finding and the presentations of the fact finding. So I think maybe, Sion, if you could help us understand exactly what, or maybe it's for us to determine, what we plan to do across each meeting. So that way, or within each meeting across the 2 years. So that way I would feel more confident that we actually get to some kind of resolution by the end and aren't trying to rush and end up with some kind of compromise result.
Chairperson Moore, if I may.
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you, Javon, for posing it.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
No, I said go ahead, CUN.
Okay. So at every meeting, there is technically no limitation on the length of the meeting. And at every meeting, we would propose that there be a sort of a 3-parter. Part 1 would be logistic issues that the task force members, the task force needs to get through. For example, approving meetings from the previous hearing, voting on logistics of the next meeting. Then there will be a section on witness testimony, both expert and personal. And then there should be a chance for various, at each meeting, for various public participation in terms of summarizing the testimony that has been heard into a sort of into how it would fit into the reparations recommendation. And so part of that could be, we could also include discussion. Again, this would be work that we would do, our staff would do with the chair and vice chair, into scheduling these meetings in such a way so that there is still discussion for recommendations within each public hearing, even though the themes are specific to certain topics.
But this would be recommendations on what in these individual meetings? I thought we had agreed to having a two-part plan. Definition, let's go around, and secondly, solutions. So if we're gonna mix it up back and forth, we end up again, lack of a better term, making it a paralysis of an analysis and giving people platforms to express their pet positions that has nothing to do with making a difference in the lives of Black folk in this nation. So y'all help me out. If we're going to have these hearings, what new under the sun could be stated about what we already know has happened to Black folks in this country? We are no different today than we were from that day when they snatched us away from Africa. They treated us as tools. They segregated us here in America after we been enslaved here. My concern is, are we going to spend enough quality time on the answer in these areas of education, economic empowerment, healthcare? And I have another question is, what audience are we trying to convince that we ought to be doing reparations? Who's the audience? You know you're not going to get it that easily from white folks, but many still feel that they haven't done nothing wrong.
So could you do me a favor and just put the schedule back up on the screen? I don't know if I have that in email form.
Sure, Justine, could you please put the schedule of would you like the first part or the second? Unfortunately, it's not all in one place.
Okay.
So
well, what you were just showing us, just each meeting, you were breaking down what each exactly this. Yeah, thank you.
So possibly, you know what may be helpful is if I jump to the August hearing and give you sort of a breakdown of how one of these meetings might look, right? So Justine, let's go to slide 32. Justine, let's go to slide 32 of my presentation. And let me just give you a sense. Okay, so if we go to 30, okay, so presumably we would have expert witnesses discuss these areas. And for example, in political participation and voting rights, the expert would be contextualizing the issue and describing it in a normative sense, but also providing potential solves specific to this issue. And that would be sort of the expert testimony. And then we could have someone, or perhaps the task force members would lead a discussion on how that expert testimony explains or contextualizes the issue, could lead to specific reparations recommendations or schemes, or that could end up being part of the eventual recommendations plan. So in other words, while we are bifurcating the report production, we are not locked into that bifurcation in the public hearing plan, because essentially in one day, you could potentially change hearts and minds, but also in that, while you still have everyone's attention, present the fixes.
Okay, I understand that now. Thank you. So could you go to the first meeting? I think it was titled Reparations 101. Is that correct?
So yes, so that would be slide. There we go. So the first meeting is today.
So it's today. So I think, so when we're thinking about Reparations 101, there's a significant amount of debate that we need to have, I believe, in terms of identifying the communities we're talking about, identifying what the task force members perhaps already believe might be reasonable forms of reparations, just to kind of get everybody, on the same page about what we're here to do, and what we might already think is a reasonable approach. And so I don't know if would that be able to be built into the second meeting, that kind of ground laying discussion.
Also, I have a question. Do we as a commission, and I know that might be more work for us, but do we as a commission, do we want to take a stab at or a beat at proposing our own timeline to compare it to the DOJ's timeline, and then coming up with a decision at a later date and before our August meeting?
I'm pushing back anything that contradicts the wishes of this commission.
Okay. So that means that we are interested in coming together as a group and coming up with our own timeline to compare to the DOJ's timeline. Is that what I'm hearing? Or is there some pushback to that idea?
I agree with that idea, and I would also add that we as the task force should be scrutinizing and evaluating the categories that have been set forth to see if there are additional categories like the ones that Dr. Brown referenced. So I do think there needs to be a structure and a process for we as the commission to come up with categories and timelines that we think are appropriate.
Yes, with categories and timelines, and also who would be providing testimony.
And I will let you know now, if you let staff run this, you will end up with a staff product, not what this committee wants.
Dr. Brown, you're on mute. Please unmute. Okay.
We don't want a staff report. We are out there. We were chosen. We've been engaged. We've been in the trenches. And we should not come up with an armchair left brain and not right left brain report.
So point of order, and I apologize here for interrupting the discussion of the task force, but I need to make a couple of things clear. First, the task force cannot meet and conduct official business unless it does so in a noticed public meeting. So to the extent that the task force wants to consider adjustments to the chapters, adjustments to the hearing schedule, a different hearing schedule, a different format, I would strongly suggest that it undertake that discussion at today's notice meeting. Otherwise, we risk doing the background research to bring it back to you in August or whenever the next meeting is. And as a reminder, the bill provides for the reimbursement currently of 10 meetings. So I hear your concerns, and our job is to implement your directive, but I would strongly suggest you move towards that directive soon.
Point of information. So you're saying that this is based on how much we get paid? So if we wanted to meet and not get paid, you're saying you're just assuming we wouldn't volunteer our time to get together to do the important business of the people?
That's not what I'm saying, sir. What I'm saying is there are two pieces of consideration. One is that when the task force meets to conduct official business, it needs to do so in a noticed and public meeting. AB 3121 contains legislative authorization for 10 meetings, and that's all. So we are trying to balance both the implementation of the statute that directs us here and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act.
Madam Chair. Members, does the regulation say please determine how many meetings that we can have?
Can you come closer to the mic, Dr. Brown, please? Or can you increase your volume and over? Thank you.
I need answers, please. I hope you share this question too. Does the legislation dictate how many meetings that we can have?
It does. I believe it does. So there are 10 meetings.
Okay, if there's only 10 meetings, they are controlling the deliberation.
Right.
My brother just said, we're not just looking for any money. We're not poor. It should be determined by this task force whether or not we want to have more than 10 meetings, but giving due notice to the public. That's the bottom line issue. And should be, in my book. It's a question of informing the people. But to tell
My concern is less with the number of meetings and rather the content of the meetings and how much time moving through that content will take away from our ability to have a discussion, but also how it will structure our discussion. And so I think that was my original concern. So, for example, I think Lisa also mentioned the issue of themes, right? And us determining what the themes might be. You know, I would appreciate, right, an opportunity for some consideration on forms of reparations, right? You know, I'll put it out there now. I'm personally, you know, a supporter of thinking very seriously about cash payment as a part of reparation. I know that is publicly and perhaps politically a controversial position, and so therefore I think we should be able to, you know, examine that very closely. We have other questions around land, for example, but especially being in California, right? There are indigenous considerations to you know, to think about. And so I think we have to, you know, we do have to spend some time on those fundamental areas. And I just think that the plan that we have so far of the content of the meeting doesn't necessarily allow for us to get at some of the broader issues. And I think what the plan so far or as presented does is actually, you know, it responds to what both Camila and Dr. Brown were saying earlier, which is that we kind of know what the injury areas are. And so I think we have to think about what are the terms of reparations and what are the ways that we think we might be able to, you know, approach them. And that takes a lot of time. And that's what hasn't necessarily been thought about a lot, at least in the public sphere, in a kind of convening like ours. So I would like for us to actually think about the constitution of the themes. And the order that some of the information is presented to us and how it impacts our ability to have discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jovan. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Lisa, everyone who has shared comments. This is something that I brought to the DOJ's attention weeks ago. So, and I'm not sure if we have the capacity at this very moment to do what I think Sarah is suggesting, and to come up with the categories and the themes now. But at this point, does anyone else have anything to share? If not, I wanted to turn it back to Sarah to see if she had any feedback or concerns based off of the most recent comments. Or do you have any feedback?
So again, our job is to take directives from the task force. And I think what I'm understanding is that the task force does not wish to further consider the proposal that's been put forth for the meeting hearing plan and would like a different proposal to be presented to the task force for consideration.
Well, can I interrupt, Madam Chair? So again, I'm wondering if there's some sort of way we can actually do both here. And given the aggressive timeline imposed by the legislation, not by the staff, I think this is an issue with the bill. We do need a coherent approach, and with adjustments. But I'm hoping we can vote on it and not throw it out. And again, I want to be very clear. I'm not telling members of this task force in particular what should be done. I'm speaking more in the nature of thinking out loud here. Assembly Member Jones Sawyer said some things that I think are really, really important. And that is that although the people in this task force who are experts in this reparations area don't need any more education or persuasion about it, the public does. And what he said basically is, if you do a good job there, then the reparations discussion and practical reality becomes easier. And I know that to be true, just based upon at least the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. It is a process. This whole thing is an evolving process. And if you skip over the process and you go straight to the remedy without educating the public and bringing them along, then there's problems about reaching the ultimate goal. So at the same time, Professor Scott Lewis, I hear you. I don't want to foreclose discussion on remedies. So I'm thinking, is there a way to incorporate a bit of both? But I have to say my bias is toward what Assembly Member Jones Sawyer talked about, that we need to bring the public along. And again, for purposes of getting things done in California, but ultimately serving as a model for the nation and looking toward HR 40, I think that's crucial. So my 2 cents, I'll stop here.
I agree with you. It's just a question of us not having time to get some of the terms set out. And I think, that, we're, a relatively, diverse in terms of our backgrounds, task force. And I think, we need to have an opportunity so that we can understand, so that the public can actually understand what our positions are. Because if we don't, then we don't have the chance to actually push one another, to think beyond what, has been effectively a kind of already generally received prescription about what we're talking about, and about what reparations should look like. And so I just want to make sure that we have enough time to, to get, some of these issues, on the table. For example, at what point do we qualify, who counts as Black in the state of California, right? I mean, these are questions that may seem, kind of taken for granted, but they're complicated, and I don't think everybody, has the same ideas about some of these questions. And so as I mentioned before, forms of remuneration, right? The questions around land, the questions around, cash and so forth. These are different, the issues of education, in a state like California, right, these are complicated things. And I think if we're going to count them as forms of reparation, we have to make sure that we're all speaking the same language effectively about what they are. So that's what I'm trying to make sure we have enough time to do.
So I have a process recommendation or suggestion. So it sounds like per the legislation, we are limited to 10 meetings, but the legislation does not dictate the length of those meetings. So perhaps in each meeting, we can do an allotment of an hour or 2 hours to discuss a substantive issue. And use that type of structure to get at the substance and to make sure that these recommendations are task force led. And that is our ideas that lead this structure and that provide direction for what this report will look like and ultimately what the recommendations will look like.
Point of clarification, and I don't mean to take us backwards in this discussion because I do think we're going somewhere, but in my understanding, the task force doesn't have a budget for 10 meetings. Like, it only says that, and I quote, for attendance at meetings during adjournment of the legislature, a legislative member of the task force shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement of expenses for not more than 10 meetings upon appropriation by the legislature. And then it says non-legislative members of the task force shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement of expenses for not more than 10 meetings upon appropriation by the legislature. But neither of those subsections state that there has to be only 10 meetings. It just says that, whether we're legislative or non-legislative members of the task force, we'll only be compensated for up to 10 meetings. So that goes back to Reggie's question. Can we get some clarification from the DOJ on that?
And then also, if someone could please clarify what that means when you say per diem, because I believe there is some misperception about like payment for task force members to be in these meetings as opposed to recompensating us for travel expenses and hotel if we have to travel to the meeting when they have in person. Those are two different things.
Thank you, Dr. Grills. Thank you, Chair Moore. Yes, there are two different things between reimbursement and per diem. And the task force members are entitled to reimbursement and per diem per the statute. I am not prepared to give an interpretation of the statute that permits the task force to hold more than 10 meetings, in part because there can be costs associated with meetings that go beyond the individual task force members and your per diem and travel reimbursements. So I'm happy to take this internally based on a directive that the task force wants to explore the possibility of more than 10 meetings, but that is not our current reading of the statute. And I'm not prepared to tell you today that you can have more than 10 meetings of this task force.
Okay. So are we going back to the original vote or what? If so, if we're going back to the original vote, can someone from the DOJ restate the motion?
As a point of order, it was to adopt the recommended schedule that came from Department of Justice.
So Chair Moore,
Is there
if
a
I
second?
may, Chair Moore, if I may, Justine, could you please put up slide 22? So as we have set up, meeting 7 is currently free as needed. And then beyond, Justine, can you go to the previous slide, please? So in terms of the systemic discrimination hearing themes, that would end at meeting 6. So that would be 5 meetings devoted to systemic discrimination, 1, of course, being today. Then, next slide, please. 7, 8, 9, and 10, 4 meetings could potentially be devoted to reparations and potential schemes for discussion. Also, keeping in mind that, as we stated before, the meetings, the systemic discrimination sort of public hearing will also fold into, there will be discussion folded into those meetings on, as I think it was Javon Scott Lewis who made this suggestion, 1 or 2 hours of discussion amongst the task force members, or I think it was someone else who made this discussion, suggestion, 1 to 2 hours of discussion related to reparations. In addition, I wanted to flag for task force members that you could potentially have, if the task force members would like to vote on this, you could potentially have 2-day meetings, right? So you wouldn't adjourn the meeting at the end of the day. And other state agencies, in fact, do hold 2-day meetings. So that's also a potentiality. And I wanted to just flag that for the members. So I believe there are 2 considerations here. One being directing the staff to consider and analyze the potentiality of having more than 10 meetings. And then the other consideration being adopting the outline of this plan, of this, and with the understanding that moving forward, we will be working with the chair and vice chair to nail down the details, including the witnesses, including what kind of discussion to include, how to plan for the time allotted, whether or not there should be 2-day meetings, etc.
If I could offer another suggestion or alternative, essentially it would be us voting down the timeline suggested by the DOJ, and then the commission would create our own framework in a public emergency meeting, which could happen tomorrow or this week or this weekend. It's feasible.
It would need to be 10 days, I believe, so that there's public notice. Or somewhere there.
Can I interject here, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
So here's the motion I would make, that we approve the proposed schedule, knowing that there's flexibility to modify as we go along, which would in turn allow at a future meeting for some of this discussion to be raised and augmented, outline be augmented. And I think there's flexibility built in, as I'm hearing this, to consider Professor Scott Lewis's proposal to at appropriate points discuss the issue of remedies. And also, as Lisa Holder noted, there's no time limit as to the length of the meeting. And then DOJ, Sarah Belton talked about a meeting can actually be a 2-day meeting. So that says to me that there's enough flexibility to accommodate Professor Scott Lewis's point. And I do think we need to not delay and move ahead on the structure. And the structure may not be perfect, but it's enough for me now to vote yes. And then we could take a harder look at it, and to Lisa Holder's point, provide input and modify as we go along. So that would be my motion, that we adopt, knowing that we have some flexibility.
I would like to offer an amendment to your amendment, or to your proposal, which is that the very next meeting really does need to focus on establishing what this task force sees as the fundamental areas. It's very hard to move forward not having an agreed, shared understanding of what we think the essential issues are and what we think that, the pieces of information that are needed, and where we kind of understand where we stand on a couple of different issues.
Absolutely. And so I think there is space to do that if we shift the meetings. I think meeting 7 currently, it's a placeholder meeting. Is that right, Sarah? I don't have the schedule in front of me.
Yes,
again, so
that's
I
right.
don't.
Meeting 7 is currently a placeholder.
Right.
And that's slide 22. If for anyone following
So
along.
I would propose that I would propose, following Dr. Grills, that we perhaps have our next meeting in August be this kind of groundwork meeting, and then the remaining meetings shift back, occupying placeholder number 7, meeting 7.
And then also, just as a procedural point, without violating the Bagley-Keene or Brown Act, we could individually send some ideas, like what we think are the list of issues, what we think the critical topics are, the things that need to be addressed. We could be sending that to the staff, who could compile essentially a synthesized list that we at least now, we're not starting 100% from scratch, so we can be efficient in our discussion at that August meeting.
I am going to actually lobby for an emergency meeting, only because I know that they indicated that as of July 2021, that is when they get the funding for consultants. And we would like to, I think that we want to be as efficient as possible in this process. So if we can have the themes prepared by the time they get the consultants, then the consultants can just get running. The consultants and the experts can just run with our themes instead of waiting until August and losing a month.
So I think what Don was suggesting earlier was that we stick with the themes that we have, but we kind of use the flexibility built into the process to accomplish what we're stating that we want to accomplish. So I don't know if there was a general sense that we needed to rethink the themes, following that. So I believe, following Dr. Grills, the idea is that we at least need to have one meeting where we, lay everything out and understand what some possible terms might be. So the first meeting in August, or the second meeting technically, but our next meeting in August could be, for example, oriented around, various forms of reparations, different ideas about what the terms of repair look like. I think we could perhaps even today discuss some of the things that we might want to have presented and then discussed in the August meeting. And then what that would mean is that what we currently have planned for our next meeting would, for the second meeting, would then, come in the third meeting, and we would just follow an order, utilizing the current empty placeholder of meeting 7.
Lisa, am I hearing from you that you're saying that there is a potential need to rethink the themes, and that you think that there should be a public emergency meeting held before August to do just that with the commission itself?
That is what I'm contemplating, and primarily because of the schedule in terms of when we can start onboarding consultants and experts who are going to be doing the research on the themes that we lay out. And so I think that the earlier that we can set out the themes and the substantive issues, the better.
I agree.
So Chair
So would
Moore,
that look like, hold on, would that look like potentially calling a meeting, within the next 10 to 20 days or so, or in July, to to discuss the themes that the DOJ presented in a public forum so that we can get community input and, of course, take that into consideration while we as a commission restructure the themes if needed based on that input. Does anyone have any
Madam
thought
Chair?
on that? Go ahead.
So I'm not sure that we have identified a strong basis for an emergency meeting. However, the August date that folks have noted from our presentation is not set in stone. And so I do think there is a possibility for the task force to suggest or to adopt or to direct that we have a noticed public meeting that complies with Bagley-Keene sooner, as the task force has indicated it might like to do. And of course, we would coordinate schedules accordingly to ensure that we have quorum, which is crucial here. But I do not think that an emergency meeting is the only path forward. I would also just note that with the July 1 funding additions, it does not necessarily mean that folks will then start immediately on July 1. As others know, we are currently in a hiring process for the positions that have been designated, additional positions beyond those already supporting the work of the task force that have been designated with this new funding. Thank you.
Okay. So I think there's at least two motions that could be voted on at this particular time. If there's a third, I feel free for others to speak up. But based off of what I'm hearing the first motion, of course, is just to leave the themes and contents as is and vote on that and approve of that, or vote to call not necessarily an emergency meeting, but another a public notice meeting before August to talk about the contents and that the DOJ proposed, take community input from that, and then as a commission about, restructuring the themes. Do you think, is there any comment on that? Do you all hear that same two different motions on the floor? Is there anything else that I'm leaving out?
Chairperson Moore, I guess what I would say is the speed issue was the most important thing to me. And that's why I was saying, let's move forward knowing that we have some flexibility. But if the consensus here is to have a meeting sooner than August, that works for me too, because it gets us going. I just didn't want us to sort of sit and, delay the process. So, if the sense of the task force is to move the meeting up to, say, in July and make that a review of the themes that are being proposed, and then tweak it there or modify it there or make major changes there, then I withdraw my initial motion for that one. But I just want to get clarification that my understanding is accurate.
Okay, thank you for withdrawing that initial motion. But so my motion would be, I move to ask the DOJ to schedule a meeting as soon as possible in July for public discussion on the themes and contents of the two-part report and the public hearings. Is there a second?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Dr. Brown.
in terms of the order, someone should make that motion on the body, not the chair.
Oh, do you have reasoning for that?
It's the
I believe that's
Robert's Rules of
Robert's
Order.
rules. The chair doesn't make the motion, a member of the body does.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Would anyone on the commission like to make a motion at this point of time?
I'll make the motion, Lisa Holder speaking. So I move that the meeting that is currently scheduled for August be moved up to July with sufficient time for public notice. And the purpose of that meeting would be to review the themes and substantive categories set forth thus far and to modify those.
I second Cheryl Groves.
Don Tamaki, we can take roll call vote. Tamaki,
Aye.
Javon Scott Lewis,
Aye.
Dr. Amos Brown,
Yes.
Assemblyman Reggie Jones Sawyer, we'll get back to him. Assemblyman Stephen Bradford, we'll get back to him. Councilwoman Monica Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Did I miss anyone else other than the two legislators?
I believe even though we made the motion, Lisa made the motion and I seconded it, we still formally vote.
Yes, please.
Okay, so you can call for us then.
Okay, Dr. Grills
Aye.
and Lisa Holder.
Aye.
Okay, great. And I vote aye myself. Okay, so the motion passes. DOJ, can you all step in? I'm not sure what happens in the absence of the two legislators, but everyone who's present has voted in favor of Lisa Holder's motion.
Thank you, Chair Moore. The motion passes because you have a quorum and a majority of members have voted yes. We will move forward with implementing the directive that the task force has just adopted in that motion.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So then the last item in the presentation, if we could go back to the thank you, is a summary of the work that we have been doing with 3 teams of experts in drafting the reports. So let me summarize the work that we've been doing. So the first set of experts we heard from this morning are Professor Darity and Ms. Mullen, and they are recognized nationally as experts in the area of reparations, and they are providing general guidance. So our second team is Professor Stacy Smith at Oregon State University, and her specialty is pre-Civil War African American history of the Western United States. And we are relying on her expertise to guide us through the institution of slavery section and its specific story in California, including many of the issues that Dr. Brown spoke about earlier in the meeting. Our third team is led by Dr. Groves' colleague, Professor Marnie Campbell at Loyola Marymount University. Professor Campbell is the professor and chair of the African American Studies Department, and she and her students will be collecting a list of all discriminatory federal and California laws, regulations, policies, and practices to be included in part 1 of the report. And so here I would request that a member of the task force make a motion to ratify our work with these experts.
So point of clarification, these are experts that you're recommending for now as we're getting started, but we can get counsel of others through testimony and otherwise?
That's correct.
Hopefully they're done.
Looking toward the two scholars, academics, Professor Grills and Scott Lewis to weigh in, because you are the scholars on the task force. I read From Here to Equality, Darity and Mullen. I found it fascinating, terrific, complete book, but I'm not an expert, so would love to hear your comments.
Given that Dr. Grills had requested and got clarification about our ability to bring in witnesses later on, the experts listed here are fine by me. I mean, Darity and Mullen effectively, we can say literally wrote the book on reparations, at least as we're thinking about them today. And so I think with them, we will be in good shape to take up these questions.
And I agree. I think that if we have the flexibility to add, I have no problems with who's been recommended. But I do know that there's some folks that are missing, whose perspective could really add to the depth of our discussion.
So then it sounds like we are ready to make a motion. I'm happy to make the motion that I move that the three sets of scholars that the Department of Justice is currently contracted to work on these issues continue with their work.
I second Gerald Grills.
Chair Moore, would you like to take us through a roll call vote, or would you like the DOJ staff to do that?
I can do it. Don Tamaki.
Aye.
Cheryl Grills.
Aye.
Lisa Holder.
Aye.
Javon Scott Lewis.
Aye.
Assemblymember Joan Sawyer. Dr. Amos Brown.
Aye.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Assemblymember. Dr. Amos Brown,
Aye.
Senator Stephen Bradford, Councilwoman Monica Montgomery Stepp, Councilwoman? Okay, so we have quorum, the majority of folks have voted yes. Go ahead. Oh, yes, aye. Aye. So the majority of folks have voted aye. We have quorum, so the motion passes. I'll hand it over to the DOJ.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So as the task force has voted earlier, the August hearing will be moved up to July, and we will plan and notice, pursuant to Bagley-Keens, a July meeting. And at this time, if there are no other issues that the task force members would like to discuss, we will move to public comment.
May I ask a question, Si-Yun, on this? The moving up the August meeting on July, with respect to the witnesses that staff was contemplating, is that going to create its own problems, or do you need to talk to those witnesses first, or what is that plan?
So my understanding of the task force's motion from the earlier discussion was that we would plan a July meeting that is not the August hearing that was currently proposed. So in other words, the July meeting would essentially be a plenary session for the task force to decide on themes and potential hearing outline. And here I want to flag for the task force members that under Bagley-Keens cannot discuss these issues with each other offline or in private or via email. Everything has to be done during the publicly noticed meeting in July. And so my, if the task force can, or rather my understanding of that July meeting then is that there will be no witnesses, that it will be a purely plenary one. Unless, of course, the task force makes a different motion and changes its mind.
I'm just sorry to raise this. Again, I defer to the other experts on the task force. And if there needs to be huge major overhaul in terms of the themes that have been proposed, I think the moving the meeting up and in devoting an entire day to that is just essential. I'm with you. But if just eyeballing the categories, if we're talking about tweaking, which could be done more quickly than using up a whole day, I really would not want to lose that day by dealing with the other business, which would involve taking testimony and other things. So I just throw that out there.
Well, can we take a few minutes? I would love to hear your thoughts on what are certain themes that may be missing, certain categories that may be missing that deserve serious discussion and evaluation and potential inclusion as substantive categories. Do people have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mentioned earlier forms of reparation. I mentioned earlier the discussion about qualification for reparation. You know, those are I think two major ones that need to be discussed urgently.
Okay. I know that Dr. Brown had some areas that he had set forth as well that he felt were urgent.
Yes. My areas were health, economic empowerment. I'm talking about serious businesses. Restoration of the historic African American watering holes in this state. Education.
If I may, I'd like to also add, how to phrase it, classes of culpability. So how do we think about the state? How do we think about other entities such as universities, corporations? I think there needs to be a consideration, if you will, about the scale of culpability. I would add that to the earlier two that I mentioned, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay. One thing that I would like to add as a possible discussion is exploring some highly symbolic forms of reparations, such as looking at a country like Haiti and what that represents for African Americans being the first country to emancipate itself. And, you know, I think part of this process should uplift stories like that. And so I'm just giving that as an example of an incredibly powerful story we should think about within this reparations construct. So maybe having an open discussion on symbolic stories that will win hearts and minds, that should be incorporated into the reparations construct. And the other thing that I would like to discuss is, and this goes to the assembly member's point about, you know, swaying the public, and Don Tamaki's point about swaying the public. I think that we need to have a discussion on what is our role, what is our public facing role, and how are we as individuals and as members of this task force going to go out and amplify these issues and these stories and start bringing the public on board, and to think about that collectively. I think we need to have time to think about our messaging and our education.
And then in addition to what the members of the task force have already shared, I'm not clear exactly what meeting 3 is covering. Not meeting 3, meeting 4, in terms of dehumanization of Black Americans, arts and culture, health and family. That seems like it feels like a lot is thrown together there without any real coherence. And I'd want to unpack that, and I'd want to make sure that we are understanding that when we're talking about health, we're including mental health as well as physical health. And in the context of talking about those kinds of things, when we think about reparations, what does it mean to repair? we are people of African ancestry come from a communal, collective background where it's the foundation of one's well-being is connected to how solid the sense of community is. And so in what ways do our strategies for reparation, or do we give voice to strategies for reparations to include repairing the community safety net that has, gone through all manner of assault? And then secondly, how do we begin to understand and repair the damage to our sense of identity as people of African ancestry, unencumbered by the lies of white superiority and Black inferiority? And then when it comes to the issue of education, I don't know exactly what's intended there in meeting 3, but I would want to make sure that in terms of education, we are looking deeply at the issue of setting the record straight, not just for Black folk understanding the history of the racial assaults on our people, but that the entire society needs to understand that. California needs to understand that. Children in the education system from preschool to advanced degrees in the academy need to understand that, and that we are also going to be calling for directives around curriculum and revising curriculum. So those are some additional things that I would like to add. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one other thing. Because I just finished leading a national COVID-19 needs assessment on its impact on communities of color, one of the things that became very, very clear in our findings, and this is over 200,000 surveys and interviews across different groups, is that we are dealing with a situation where our communities don't have adequate infrastructure. And so when we think about how we're going to repair the damage, how are we going to be addressing some of those infrastructure issues, whether that's broadband, we've got an immense amount of food insecurity, and the list goes on and on. So, we've got to have whole communities. We can't just have folks with money in their pockets individually.
Lisa, did you want to wrap up our discussion?
Yeah, I've so far I collected 12 addendum categories that I'm sure are going to have a lot more to say about. I, for one, think it would be very informative and uniting to have a day where we just really drill down on these issues and drill down on how to significantly modify the themes and add to them, and also start to think about the experts that we would like the DOJ to bring forward to help us evaluate some of these addendum issues.
Thank you. That makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Thank you for offering that, Lisa. I agree. That sounds like a great step forward in the right direction. Are there any other or lasting comments on this point of discussion? Okay. All right. So let's turn it over to the DOJ now, because we have already voted, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so we
Okay,
should
great.
be wrapping.
Thank you so much. And now, as we have announced in the introduction and during break, we are moving to public comment. Public comment will be for 1 hour. Each individual is limited to 2 minutes for public comment. At 2 minutes, your microphone will be turned off and you will not be able to turn yourself back on. And now I'm going to, and I apologize. So before I turn it over to my colleague Corey to explain the tech side, I see that we have approximately 125 attendees. We may not get to everyone for public comment. As we have been discussing and presenting throughout today, there will be 9 more public meetings, and we welcome everyone in the community to make comments in the future. At the end of the meeting, we will post the task force's email address. We invite everyone to submit written comment and testimony via that email address. So I will now turn it over to my colleague Corey to explain the tech instructions for the public to participate in public comment.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you will see, if you look on the upper right-hand side of your screen on the sidebar, there is the shape of a hand. If you just click on that, then it will prompt a raise hand feature, and on our end, I will accept your raise hand feature, and you will get a notification at the top center of your screen to continue. You have to click continue, and once you are accepted and brought into a presenter, then you will be automatically muted, and once it is your turn, you will be unmuted and have your time to speak. If you are to go over your time, you will be automatically muted and dropped back to an attendee. I will be accepting the raise hand features as they come in order. It looks like we have 8 so far, so people are familiar with the process. Once the person in front of you is done speaking, then I will say your name and your time will begin once you are unmuted. And lastly, there is a 20-second delay between the presenter and the attendee, which you'll notice once you are brought into a presenter mode. So please keep that in mind. With that, I will begin to accept in order of received the people that have raised their hand. So you should be seeing a continue button on the top of your screen. First up, we have Marcus Champion. Marcus, you may go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcus Champion, and I'm with the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants, Los Angeles, Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. As a Black American and a Black Californian born and raised in Inglewood, currently in Los Angeles, I have been directly impacted by the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. My expectation for this task force is to set the bar for what federal reparations can and should look like, meaning substantive redress in the form of cash payments, first and foremost, class status, as well as programs to close the racial wealth gap, such as land allotments. So many times when it comes to addressing the needs of the Black community, in particular the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, the remedies are on the whole symbolic, the solutions are generalized and don't target the specific needs of the community or the specific harm that's been inflicted on the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. Like the Color Wealth Report, Los Angeles states, Black Americans in Los Angeles have
Next, we have Friday Jones. Friday, you may speak.
Hi, my name is Kanta Jones Muhammad, and I'm known as Friday Jones. I'm the co-chair of the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants. As California goes, so does the nation. The task before you can change the very fabric of America. This commission has the ability to discover where individuals and the law perpetuated structural racism, where decisions have affected generations, enforcement of federal policy. It is the responsibility of this commission to uncover and identify all the players and then find remedies that will hold the players accountable. The state has the power to assess licensing fees and to industry to subsidize cash payments where appropriate to the living families or their descendants that endured financial harm. The state has the ability to create solutions with industry and private sector to repair past practices. The state also has the ultimate power to demand the federal government, all congressional members from our home state, and all senators from California to co-sponsor both HR 40 and S40 with the amendments as entered into the record by Dr. Sandy Darity. No one alive today has practiced slavery, and no one alive today was a slave. I beg to differ. The IRS and the state governments across this nation have records of estates and taxation and beneficiaries of estates for white families in particular whose ancestors owned slaves, had businesses tied to slavery. Across this nation, there are still records for the 15 million acres once owned at the height of 1910 by the descendants of chattel slavery and the subsequent massive loss. The records exist. It's the commissioners of AB 3121 that must lead the greatest repair of human history so that this country can actually live up to this Constitution for all of its citizens, especially the American Negro. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Friday. Next up, we will have Chris L. Chris L., your time begins now.
Thank you so much. And before I say what I have to say, I want to say, may our ancestors guide us and give us strength in such a way that we have never seen before, because we are going to need it, right, to make this reparations effort real for Black folks here in California and across the nation. My name is Chris Lodson with the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I live here in Sacramento, California. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you very quickly as a Black American currently impacted, and I want to emphasize here, currently impacted by the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. My expectation is for a task force that is open and responsive to community voices like mine. In addition, I expect this task force to create reparations proposals that move California and the nation closer to corrective justice.
I believe Chris is done speaking. Next up, we have Baba. Baba, your time begins now.
Did you call for Baba Jahahara?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. First, this is Jahahara Aminra Al-Kibbalan Ma'at. I'm a life member, past National Male Co-Chair, and Western Region Representative for our National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and COBRA. And COBRA has been advocating for full reparations for African Americans for the past 3.5 decades on the federal, local, and international level, and through legislation, the courts, at the United Nations, and in the streets. Our members were also the visionaries, along with the late Congressman John Conyers Jr. and others, who created our HR 40 and now S40, which is the foundation of our state legislation. I want to thank Dr. Shirley Weber, whose family escaped terrorism in Hempstead County, Arkansas, as did mine on both sides, the Legislative Black Caucus, as well as Governor Gavin Newsom, for moving this first in the U.S. process forward. And special congratulations to all of you as well. 3 quick points. First, I am very critical that non-Africans were appointed to this task force over so many qualified and longtime Black reparations advocates. While we always welcome the support of our allies, however well-intended, they cannot speak for African people. Instead, they should be utilized as valued resource persons, not as decision makers. Secondly, I strongly encourage this task force to schedule a minimum of 12 public hearings or listening sessions outside of your regular meetings around the state and online, where African Americans can offer their powerful testimonies, experiences, insights, and recommendations to help heal the past and continuing horrors and harm. Finally, to increase participation, please hold all future meetings and hearings on Saturdays. As a retired labor union, community, environmental justice organizer, I know this would give more of our current and former residents, workers, students, and families greater access and opportunities for engagement in this process. I thank you.
Thank you for your comment. You've reached the 2-minute limit, so I'm going to, if you have further comments, please feel free to email us. Thank you.
May God bless you all.
Thank you. Next up, we have Angela Nirvana. Angela, you are unmuted and your time begins now.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Angela Nirvana. I am a proud comrade of the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I live in Long Beach, California. As an educated ADOX woman, which stands for American Descendant of Chattel Slavery, with experience in diverse industries, I understand firsthand not just the impact of slavery and Jim Crow on my people, but also the accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantages as its vestiges, and how it has driven us out of California. Our affirmative action benefits everyone but whom it was intended for, us. We are the anchor of this country's capitalism, now required to be bilingual just to get a job interview here in California. And when we show up, we don't have the complexion for the protection for hire. While measures like Prop 16 get voted down, and we pretend we no longer need quotas specifically for American descendants of chattel slavery, we are officially at George Floyd, 9 minutes, 29 seconds, literally and figuratively, on the bottom in every metric of social and economic justice, although our ancestors built all the wealth the immigrants and whites eat from. I am in favor of cash repair because social programs are often given with the left hand and given away with the right. Cash will enable us to do for ourselves, as has been the expectation, without the resources to do so. I thank each and every one of you for your contribution to this commission, and I'm extremely proud, and congratulations to Camilla Moore as the selected chair of this task force. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Angela. Next up, we have Tiffany Quarles. Tiffany, you have been unmuted and your time begins now.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, task force members. My name is Tiffany Quarles, and I'm with the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants, the Los Angeles branch, as well as the Coalition for Just and Equitable California. I live in South Central Los Angeles, and I'm a fourth generation Angelino. As a Black American who descends from American slavery, I am still impacted by the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. My family first moved to Los Angeles in the 1940s. As both sides, they were subjected to a segregated Los Angeles. They were subjected to redlining that led to urban decline. I grew up during the 90s when we had the LA riots. My family grew up when we had the Watts riots. So I lived through a lot of the bad policies myself that California has put in place. So in addition, I do want this task force to please create proposals that move California and the nation closer to corrective justice. I also want to congratulate Camilla Moore, who's the chair of this task force. She speaks for our community. She speaks for the millennial generation. Thank you, and that's what I have to say today.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up, we have Cam Howard. Cam, you may begin speaking. Your time begins now.
To the task force, Cam Howard of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America and COBRA, you are entrusted to deliver reparation initiatives for centuries of crimes committed against people of African descent who reside in California. The crimes committed have been many and horrible. We speak of these actions as crimes, not immoral or sinful acts, but crimes because the United Nations declared the transatlantic slave trade, slavery, and apartheid, Jim Crow as it's known in the US, be crimes against humanity. Therefore, your job would be like any other investigation of any other crime. However, in this instance, the crimes were many, passing multiple generations, thousands of perpetrators, and over a vast array of territory. This is an incredible task. However, there's much science, research, and expertise that is available for such a magnificent undertaking. Once the investigation is complete and the crimes are cataloged and the injuries documented, the task then becomes to craft mechanisms that address the injuries such that they are eradicated. Also an incredible task. Fortunately, a model exists to direct the activities of this task force to achieve that goal. That model is full reparations, which in COBRA purposely wrote into the legislation as the findings, purpose, and duties of AB 3121 were lifted right out of H.R. 40, where I was the lead writer. Full reparations is the highest global standard for reparations, whose mandate is to, quote, wipe out all consequences of the crimes, unquote. Utilizing this framework is how you would get there. We admonish you to allow this mandate to lead in your deliberation on proposals, or it is the mandate of the legislation. And COBRA is available to assist you, where your success is our success, your success is the nation's success. This is what we desire and what we work toward. Thank you, and congratulations, Camila.
Thank you, Cam. Next up, we have Harriet Barton. Harriet, you have been unmuted and your time begins now.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you for all being on the commission here today. My name is Harriet Barton, and I've lived in the San Fernando Valley many, many years. There's not many of us left here, ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, and I've seen change happen. I've also been greatly impacted by what I believe are the negative effects of that change. But what I do hope is that this commission is sincere in their efforts. This is for American Descendants of Slavery. This is not about BIPOC, about POC, people of color. We know all lives matter. And I just would hope that this commission is focused on doing the right thing to send us on the path to federal reparations. This is really about lineage. It's not just about color. The government owes a debt that's long overdue. And like I said, I do pray that this commission can focus on what we're actually saying. And this is not about hate and division. This is about being specific. It's about specific policies for us, cash, protections, policies that are for ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery. That does matter, but it is not divisive. And no symbolism, please. We've had lots of symbolism, and it just gets us nowhere. We're right back here where we started. So please, I thank you all for your dedication, and hopefully we can get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Next up, we have the initials TAC. You are up, and your time begins now.
Hello, Task Force. Welcome. My name is Dr. Tish Crawford. I'm with the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I live in California, and I live in Los Angeles. Thank you for the opportunity as a Black American currently impacted by the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. My expectation is the task force is open and responsive to the community voices like mine. And I'm going to say it not once, but twice, 3 times. Mental health, mental health, mental health. Our community is in need of this. Homelessness is definitely prominent, and our families are beyond disenfranchised. They have no place to live. So I expect this committee to be on it and to really and truly go in there and get those voices out there, because those voices need to be heard. In addition, I expect for the task force to create reparation proposals that move California and the nation closer to corrective justice. And thank you, God, for Miss Camila Moore. God bless you. You are the meaning of the youth. I'm excited that you're the chair, and I just really feel that we're in good hands. So thank you so much, Miss Camila Moore. Thank you for the committee for voting for her, because she is definitely the voice that we now need to hear from those ancestors passed on to our descendants to make sure that those things that they did not have come to light. So thank you once again, Task Force. You guys are all powerful in your own right. Please do the right thing. Our voices need to be heard, and we need to go to the homeless communities, because that is what's impacting us really poorly right now, and we got to do a better job. We have to. We really and truly have to. So thank you. And also I'd like to say for a possible expert, Dr. Gruels, she wrote Post-Traumatic Slavery Syndrome. I think she will be a great expert to talk about some of the effects that this has happened to us from generation
Thank you so
to
much for your
generation.
comments. You've reached the 2-minute limit. Thank you. If you have further comments, feel free to email us.
Next up, we have Umoya Glass. You have been unmuted, and your time begins now.
Thank you for your comment. You've reached your 2-minute limit.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next up, we have
Thank you for your comment. You've reached your 2-minute limit.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next up, we have Michael Thomas. Michael, you have been unmuted and you may begin speaking now.
Hello, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michael Thomas with the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I live in San Diego, California, the Mission Valley area, and I thank you guys for the opportunity to speak. As a Black man and a military veteran in America, I've been greatly impacted by the legacy of Jim Crow and slavery. My expectation is for the task force is to be open and responsive to community voices like mine. This task force gives me hope to raise a family and for my children to also have a real chance at living a rich and productive life in the country that their ancestors built. In addition, I expect this task force to create reparation proposals for that move California and the nation closer to corrective justice. I'm also excited to witness Kamala Moore becoming the chair of the task force so that voices like myself of everyday community members are represented. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Jerry. Jerry, you've been unmuted and your time begins now.
Thank you very much for everyone, the task force, their time, and appreciate the energy here for reparations. My name is Jerry Shaw. I am a member of Reparations Over Everything and the Reparationist Collective, and I wanted to focus on a couple of key things. Number one, it is vitally important that who is eligible for reparations is defined. It cannot be vague. It then needs to be clearly defined. I would also point out that centuries of policy specifically targeted against the U.S. Negro freedmen. We need specific policy targeted to repair the U.S. Negro freedmen. And so it's vitally important that what comes out of this AB 3121 targets that group and that group specifically. I would also like to ask that there be some clarity from the members of the task force on the issue of first cash payments, as the U.S. Negro freedmen has been prevented from accumulating wealth generationally by policy of the U.S. government and the states, that land, where you stand on land for the descendants of U.S. freedmen. And thirdly, protected class status. We know that AAPI passed after 3 months, yet we have an anti-lynching bill on the federal level that is still stuck in committee after 100 years. This is the type of problems that we see targeted specifically at our ethnicity, and we need these things addressed, and I hope that this task force will address these things. Thank you, and I speak my piece.
Thank you, Jerry. Next up, we have Asia Lampley. Asia, you have been unmuted and your time begins now.
Thank you. I just want to say, listen, it looks like whoever orchestrated this task force can't possibly be acting in good faith. And let me also say subliminally, we need cash reparations. The fact that you would bar or prohibit the task force from speaking to the general public is indicative of your rinse and repeat process of handing us perceived wins or perceived process. We saw an example of this when AAPI got its anti-lynching bill passed on the heels of the George Floyd verdict, whilst Black teenage girls were getting executed by cops as if it was a human sacrifice, rinse and repeat that they like to do. It is quite evident to me that when MJ sang that song, You Can't Win, he knew that these big-nosed crows, these white boys with rituals, would continue to find ways to cheat and undermine us. And this is what we are witnessing here today. You're not even facilitating an opportunity for this task force to deliver cash reparations or anything measurable or noteworthy for that matter. To those asking for mutual health, for mental health services, please stop asking for these low asks. You need to improve your ask, don't dilute it. We need to focus on cash reparations and who is eligible for those cash reparations. Everyone else is entitled to receive cash reparations, but us, we are given options of education that has never worked for us. There are white boys who don't even graduate from high school earning more than our PhDs. I do not want to hear any more of this white Jewish rhetoric about how they're going to educate and fix the Black community. It needs to stop. And I have spoken my piece. Thank you. This is Asia Lampley.
Next up, we have Yvette. Yvette, you are unmuted and your time begins now. Yvette, are you there? Give Yvette a couple more seconds. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on. It seems like Yvette is not there. Oh, there you are.
I'm here. I'm here. Okay, my concerns are, can future meetings and hearings be streamed on Zoom or multiple social platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, TikTok, etc. My concerns is that most Black Californians do not have the Blue Jeans app and are unfamiliar with the technology. In the future, and the DOJ should ensure that the means are accessible as possible. Also, for future meetings, the agenda should indicate the estimated time public comment will begin and end, so that the people who work, go to school, or may have commitments on that day plan accordingly. And last but not least, for future meetings, can the DOJ strategically partner with African American legacy organizations and publications, private and public, also agency, to spread awareness about the task force. And also would like to say that we need to meet people where they are, and the goal is to do whatever it takes for the greater good to get it done. And we have to put our personal, when we see that there's rearing, our personal issues or problem ahead aside, and let's come together as a team, as it was stated, and get this done, because our ancestor is truly watching. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Dawn Alston Page. Dawn, you have been unmuted and your time begins.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm so honored to be here. My name is Dawn Alston Page. I'm with the Reparations Collective, and we just want to extend our extreme congratulations to Chairman Moore. We are very pleased that she has been selected to chair this process, and very encouraged that things will be done the right way. I really want to emphasize that we need to take advantage of this opportunity to educate the people in California and the nation. If you guys have funding attached in any way to your task force, to please utilize those funds to create a series of public service announcements. So at the bare minimum, at least we will begin to turn those lights on. Cash payments, land protected status, those are really the only things that need to be discussed. And I would ask, be so bold as to ask that those who are not in favor of those elements as a starting basis should recuse themselves. But again, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. Camilla, I am so encouraged and just ecstatic that we have the younger generation in the forefront of charting the course for the future. And I'm just really excited, and I have big hopes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Next up, it looks like we have Michelle Burton of Community Health Councils. Michelle, you have been unmuted and your time begins.
Alrighty, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So Dr. Ames Brown quoted Nike earlier in saying that we need to just do it. Reparations is not just about restorative justice for the direct descendants of slavery. Advancing reparations is about repairing the ongoing harm that is being experienced by Black families and children as a result of historic systemic racism. Reparations is about dismantling racist systems that actively and daily oppress, imprison, murder, and literally destroy the hopes and aspirations of all Black peoples in this state and country. Reparations is about acknowledging the fact that capitalism, neoliberal or otherwise, will never work for Black people because we have never owned the means of production, because we are the means of production, and our bodies have not been our own. Reparations is not welfare, it is justice in the midst of ongoing injustice. Reparations is representative of our collective struggle toward a more compassionate and equitable society. I applaud my state in taking this step and each one of you on this task force to your commitment. And I look forward to actively working to educate and mobilize other Californians in advancing reparations as a symbol to other states that we can and will stamp out the vestiges of slavery here and across the country. We at Community Health Councils, which is in South LA, are here to support and offer our alliance and our voices, and look forward to engaging with you all over the course of the next year or so as we get this done. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jonathan Burgess. Jonathan, you have been unmuted and you may begin speaking.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hold on.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So now you can. Okay. Sorry about that. First of all, I'd like to, thank the task force and all those of you that are going to commit this time for such a important, an important part of history for the state of California. I speak before you guys today as a fifth-generation Californian, probably one of the only descendants of one of the first African Americans brought to California during the gold rush of 1849. And I would ask that you guys, for this task force, look into the stories of how the state park Marshall Gold Discovery, which is Coloma, was actually taken by the state of California. And the lands and the Black families that were there, I'm one of those Black families and probably one of the only living descendants. It is of the utmost importance that we educate as to how the wealth was taken from original pioneers that were brought to this state from other states. And it will show not only just California, but this was a strategy that was used across all United States. And if we truly are California and we'll be the leaders in this Reparations Act, I would ask that this committee be open to truly looking into and government officials did back in 1870 and 1850. We can't get to the 1900s until we reconcile what happened before. My name is Jonathan Burgess. I am a direct descendant of Rufus Burgess, who was brought to California. I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Ernest, you are currently our last speaker, so if there's anyone else out there that would like to raise their hand, it looks like we have one person in the queue that I have accepted your hand raise. So Kevin, if you are listening, please go ahead and accept my acceptance, and you will be able to go ahead and speak. Otherwise, Ernest, you are our last speaker, and if anyone else would like to raise their hand, please feel free to do so at this time. Go ahead, Ernest, your time begins now.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend the members on the task force for taking the steps, historical steps today to support racial equity in America, true racial equity. I think until we address America's involvement in, in chattel slavery, redlining, convict leasing, et cetera, and all the state sanction laws that prohibited Black Americans from living the American dream, I think we could never live in this post-racial America that our politicians so often like to speak of. So I do want to commend the task force for taking the steps to address reparations. And I also want to state that, maybe it's worth something if you guys assess the media's involvement in state-sanctioned racism. Oh, shoot. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ernest. Next up, we have Monica. Monica, you have been unmuted and you may begin speaking.
Thank you.
My name is Monica Toliver. I am originally from Los Angeles, but I now live in the high desert area of San Bernardino County. That would be like the cities of Hesperia, Barstow, Phelan. I want to say that I'm happy to be here. I've been a social worker for 15 years. Prior to that, I've worked with kids in foster care for 8 years. And I want to say that much of the generational trauma and the generational despair that I've seen that was manifest through homelessness and foster care, these systems, the system of mental health, is a direct corresponded directly from the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow here in California. My family has been here since the 1930s, and I want the commission to, you are been given a serious task. I want you to consider everything that you will hear along the way, and I'm asking that you all be just and fair in your recommendations, and I thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Next up, we have Kevin. Kevin, you've been unmuted and your time begins now. Kevin, if you're there, you're on the clock. Give Kevin a couple more seconds. See if Kevin can fix any of his issues, maybe with his microphone. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute Kevin. We'll come back to you. Next, we have Lori Jenkins. Lori, you may go ahead and begin.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the commission. Thank all of you for your upcoming service. I think that one of the most important outcomes that this commission could arrive at is to ensure that whatever remedies are proposed, whatever proposals are made, that those proposals contain specificity and that they're not watered down and that they are targeted toward the people who have historically bore the brunt of oppression in California and in the United States as a whole. Too often we see policies that were meant for us be then turned around and handed out to every other group, and we end up getting the scraps. And it is just my prayer that this commission would take that into serious consideration to ensure that that does not happen. My name is Lori, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Lori. I'm going to come back to Kevin. Kevin, you've been unmuted. If you want to go ahead and try to speak and see if it's working. Okay, we seem to not have Kevin, so we're going to move on. Next, we have Zinga. You are unmuted and your time begins.
Hi, this is Nzinga Griffin, and I am out of Sacramento, California. And I just want to make sure that thank you, first of all, and congratulations to Commission Chair Camilla Moore and Dr. Amos Brown. And I just want to say, please make sure that when you guys are listening to this information, doing your expert duties, that you remember the victims here. We need to make sure that the victims are the ones that are compensated for the harms that have been done to them, not the BIPOC community and the POC community. This is specifically just as it was when the Japanese received reparations. They didn't give reparations to the Chinese. They didn't give reparations to the Hmong, the Vietnamese, and everyone else. Please make sure that reparations are given in the proposal and addressed, and it should be done early so that there is not any confusion. And I'm sure that all your facts will line up to address the people that were harmed by the United States governments and all the localities that you're going to have at your disposal. please ensure that the redress is done properly to the victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Zinga. That wraps up our public speaking portion. Ewan, I'm gonna hand it back to you.
Thanks, Corey. So thank you everyone for participating in public comment. As always, if you have further comments, please feel free to email us. That email will be posted on the last slide at the end of the meeting. And now I will hand it back to Chair Moore to close us out. Thank you.
Okay, great. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on public comment. The community input has been absolutely astounding and inspiring. Also, I wanted to thank Vice Chair Dr. Amos Brown. Your insight has been invaluable thus far, and I'm looking forward to working with you together to make this task force a success. And of course, thank you all to the rest of the commission, namely Don Tamaki, Dr. Cheryl Grills, Javon Scott Lewis, Lisa Holder, Councilwoman Monica Montgomery Stepp, Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, the Senator Stephen Bradford, Lisa Holder, if I didn't say your name already. Thank you all. This is going to be a great task force, and I'm looking forward to working with you all. And again, thank you to the DOJ. I know you all have been working since October of last year, doing some really great preliminary work. What you did was not in vain, and we also look forward to working with you all as well. I'm looking forward to, again, future hearings. I'm looking forward to making these meetings more accessible to the Black community. If there's any other last thoughts, I would like to close it there. Okay, and Dr. Brown, go ahead. Can't hear you, Dr. Brown.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of this terrific task force. Let me say that, as one of my sons in the ministry says all the time, peacock proud, hyena happy, and elephant elated to be a part of this dream team. And I feel that confidence that you placed in both of us to serve as your leadership of this task force is a marriage that was made in heaven. Down in Mississippi, where I come from, they say if you want to really have a successful plowing of a field, you never team up two young mules to plow by themselves. Neither do you team up two old mules to plow by themselves. But you always team up an old mule and a young mule. I thank God that I'm that old mule. Serve as your vice chair, Madam Chair. And we applaud you as a young mule. This is, after all, time of the ladies. But I've always been on the side of the ladies in Third Baptist for 45 years. We believe in women leadership. Ordained the first woman to be licensed and ordained to preach. Maybe some of you know of her. Martha Simmons was down there in Atlanta, great scholar, writer, and I'm just proud to say, we got a great thing going here. Let's keep it together, hold our hope, stay in the struggle till victory is ours. Well, I can smell it, I see it, and I hear it. We're going to show this nation the way to enlightenment, engagement, encouragement, empathy, and excellence. We do that, keep those E's together, we shall be empowered. Nobody to tell us that we're slaves, but we were enslaved by a cruel, evil system. But we're going to break it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you all. Bye. Until our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.